I knew the moment I signed those closing papers that the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association was going to be trouble. But I never imagined they would literally endanger their own neighbors just to enforce their precious aesthetic rules. My name is Jacob Anderson, and I grew up in Montana where winter meant business. When I moved to northern Minnesota for a job opportunity at a manufacturing plant outside of Duluth, I thought I understood cold weather. What I didn't understand was the kind of vindictive pettiness that could exist in a planned suburban community. The house was perfect for what I needed. 3 bedrooms, a decent garage, and most importantly, 5 acres of land on the edge of the development where the properties backed up against open farmland. The real estate agent had glossed over the HOA requirements, handing me a thick binder of rules that I stupidly assumed were the usual don't paint your house neon pink and keep your lawn mowed type of thing. I should have read every single page. My first winter there started mild. November brought light snow, and December was cold but manageable. I met a few neighbors, mostly keeping to myself as I settled into the new job and got the house exactly how I wanted it. The HOA president, a woman named Brenda Morrison, stopped by in early December with a plate of cookies and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was probably 50, with that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who spent their free time finding violations in other people's yards. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said, standing on my porch with the cookies extended like a peace offering. "I'm the HOA president, and I just wanted to make sure you received all your documentation and understand our community standards." I took the cookies, thanking her. "I got the binder. Seems pretty straightforward." Her smile tightened. "We take great pride in maintaining property values here. I noticed you have some equipment in your driveway. The rules state that all recreational vehicles, trailers, and commercial equipment must be stored in garages or behind privacy fences." I glanced back at my truck. "That's just my pickup. The utility trailer," she clarified. "I'm using it this weekend. I'll put it away when I'm done. See that you do." The smile never wavered, but something in her tone made my jaw clench. We have standards to uphold. After she left, I ate one of the cookies and immediately regretted it. They tasted like cardboard and disappointment. I should have taken it as an omen. January hit like a freight train. The weather forecasts started predicting a polar vortex, the kind of sustained cold and snow that Minnesota was famous for, but that still managed to surprise people every single year. I had grown up dealing with this kind of weather, and I knew exactly what my property needed. The 5 acres behind my house stretched out to meet an open field that ran for at least half a mile before hitting a tree line. Without any windbreak, the snow would drift like crazy, potentially burying my driveway, garage, and making it impossible to get to work. The solution was simple and time-tested: a snow fence. I drove into Duluth and bought 200 feet of orange plastic snow fence and 8 wooden stakes. The material cost me less than $100, and I spent a Saturday afternoon in mid-January installing it about 50 feet from my property line, positioned to catch the drifting snow before it reached my house. The fence stood 4 feet tall, bright orange, and absolutely functional. I stepped back and admired my work. The forecast called for heavy snow and high winds starting that night. By morning, I expected to see significant drifting in the area, but my driveway would be clear. Monday morning, I woke to 2 feet of fresh snow and winds that howled like wounded animals. As predicted, massive drifts had formed in the field, with my snow fence catching most of it before it reached my property. My driveway had maybe 6 inches, easily manageable with my plow attachment. I cleared it in 20 minutes and headed to work, satisfied with a job well done. I came home to find a bright orange violation notice stapled to my front door. "Dear homeowner," it read in impersonal printed text. "It has come to the attention of the Whispering Pines HOA board that you have erected an unauthorized structure on your property. Per Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Community Guidelines, all exterior structures, fences, and modifications must be submitted for architectural review and approved by the board prior to installation. Your orange plastic fencing is in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 8, regarding approved fence materials and colors. You have 48 hours to remove this violation or face fines of $100 per day. Sincerely, the Whispering Pines HOA Board." I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I grabbed the HOA binder and flipped to the sections mentioned. Sure enough, buried in the dense legalese were requirements that all fences be made of approved materials like wood, vinyl, or ornamental metal, and that all exterior modifications required prior approval. The definition of fence was broad enough that it technically included my temporary snow fence. I called the number listed on the violation notice. Brenda answered on the second ring. "Whispering Pines HOA, Brenda speaking. This is Jacob Anderson on Pinecrest Drive. I just got a violation notice about my snow fence." "Yes, Mr. Anderson. We take our architectural standards very seriously. That orange plastic is not approved material and is frankly an eyesore. It's a snow fence. It's temporary and functional. Without it, my entire driveway will be buried. That's not the HOA's concern. The fence violates our community standards. It needs to come down within 48 hours. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Can I submit it for approval? I'll fill out whatever paperwork you need. The Architectural Review Committee meets once a month. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. Your application would need to be submitted in writing at least 1 week prior to review, so a month from now, approximately. By then winter will be half over. Look, this is a standard snow fence. It's used all over the Midwest. It's temporary. I'll take it down in April." "Mr. Anderson, I understand you're new to our community, but we have rules for a reason. That orange plastic fence is visible from several other properties and detracts from the aesthetic we've worked hard to maintain. It needs to be removed. And what am I supposed to do about the snow drifts? I suggest you invest in a better snow removal system, perhaps a larger plow or a snow blower. Other residents manage just fine. Other residents don't have 5 acres backing up to an open field." Her voice took on that condescending tone I was already learning to hate. "Rules apply to everyone equally, Mr. Anderson. Remove the fence or face the fines. Your choice." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the evening researching Minnesota HOA law and reading through every single page of the community guidelines. Legally, the HOA was within their rights to enforce architectural standards. The guidelines I had signed when purchasing the house gave them broad authority over exterior modifications. The snow fence technically violated multiple sections, but morally, they were being ridiculous. I went to bed angry and woke up to another winter storm rolling in. The forecast showed 3 more inches of snow with sustained winds of 30 miles per hour and gusts up to 50. Perfect drifting conditions. I watched through my window as snow devils danced across the field, the wind picking up loose powder and carrying it in white sheets. By noon, the drifts in the open field were 4 feet tall. My snow fence caught most of it, leaving my property relatively clear. But I could see the drifts forming beyond the fence line, building up in waves like frozen ocean swells. The second violation notice arrived Tuesday morning, 48 hours almost to the minute. This one informed me that I had failed to comply and that daily fines would begin accruing immediately. $100 per day, every day the fence remained. I called Brenda back. "You're really going to fine me for protecting my property. Remove the fence, Mr. Anderson." "I'm submitting an application for architectural review. I'll fill out the paperwork today." "That's your right. But the fence still needs to come down until approval is granted. If it's a snow fence, the committee will make their determination. I can tell you right now that orange plastic is not going to be approved. It's not aesthetically consistent with our community standards." "What if I painted it?" "What color?" "I don't know, brown, green." She made a thoughtful sound. "You would still need approval for any fence. And painting it doesn't change the fact that it's currently in violation. The fines continue until it's removed." I hung up and seriously considered my options. $100 a day added up fast. Over a month, that was $3,000. I couldn't afford that, not with my mortgage and other bills. But I also knew what would happen without the snow fence. I had grown up in this climate. I knew how drifts formed and how quickly they could make a property inaccessible. Wednesday morning, I admitted defeat. I went out in 15-degree weather and pulled up the snow fence, coiling it and the stakes in my garage. The orange plastic looked at me accusingly from the corner. I had paid less than $100 for material that would save me hours of work and potential thousands in snow removal costs. And it was useless because of aesthetic standards. That afternoon, I received an email from Brenda confirming that the violation had been resolved and thanking me for my cooperation in maintaining community standards. Thursday brought another storm system. This one was worse, a genuine blizzard that dumped 8 inches overnight with winds that screamed like banshees. I woke Friday morning and couldn't see my garage from my bedroom window. A drift 6 feet tall had formed right across my driveway, perfectly positioned where the wind coming across the open field hit the relative shelter of my property. The snow fence would have caught it 50 feet back. Instead, it was now my problem. I spent 4 hours with a snow blower and a shovel clearing the driveway. My back ached, my fingers were numb despite heavy gloves, and I was late for work. When I finally got the truck out and started down Pinecrest Drive toward the main road, I noticed something interesting. The houses deeper in the development were fine. They had normal amounts of snow, easily cleared, protected by the other homes around them and the trees planted throughout the neighborhood. But the 3 other houses on my street, the ones on the edge of the development like mine, were buried. Drifts covered their driveways, their front walks, even reached halfway up some front doors. I saw John Miller 3 houses down running a snow blower, his face red with exertion and cold. His property backed up to the same field mine did, and he was dealing with the same drifting problem. I slowed down as I passed. John looked up and waved, a gesture more of shared misery than friendliness. Over the next week, I watched the pattern repeat. Every storm brought massive drifts to the properties on the edge of the development. Every time, it took hours to clear. The houses in the interior of Whispering Pines barely had to shovel. I started paying closer attention during my drives to and from work. Brenda Morrison lived on Aspen Court, deep in the development. Her house was surrounded by other homes, protected from the wind, with mature trees lining her street. She probably spent 20 minutes after each storm clearing a light dusting from her driveway. She had no idea what those of us on the edge were dealing with. The thought that started forming in my mind was petty and vindictive, and I tried to dismiss it. But it kept coming back. especially after I received my first utility bill and saw how much I had spent on gas heating the house during the cold snap. Especially after I had to take a personal day when another blizzard buried my driveway and I couldn't get to work. Especially after I threw my back out shoveling and had to pay for a chiropractor visit. February arrived with forecasts that made even Minnesota natives nervous. The meteorologists were predicting a series of Alberta clippers followed by a major nor'easter that would stall over the Great Lakes. We were looking at potentially 2 weeks of sustained cold and snow, the kind of winter weather that made national news and shut down entire cities. I attended my first HOA meeting in early February. It was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the main entrance that had a meeting room, a kitchenette, and bathrooms. About 20 residents showed up, mostly older couples who apparently had nothing better to do on a Tuesday evening. Brenda ran the meeting with the efficiency of a military operation. She stood at the front with a laptop and projector, displaying an agenda that covered everything from landscaping contracts to the budget for repainting the community sign. I sat in the back and waited for the open comment period. When she finally asked if anyone had new business, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Anderson," I stood, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I wanted to discuss the architectural review process for snow fences. As some of you know, several properties on the edge of the development back up to open farmland, which creates serious drifting problems. A temporary snow fence would help manage this issue, but the current guidelines don't allow for them. Brenda's expression could have frozen vodka. The guidelines are quite clear about approved fence materials and colors. They're designed to maintain property values for everyone. I understand that, but these would be temporary, removed each spring. They're functional, not aesthetic. An older man I didn't know spoke up from the middle of the room. "I think the guidelines are fine as they are. If we start making exceptions, where does it end? Pretty soon everyone will have whatever ugly thing they want in their yard." "This isn't decorative," I said, trying to keep my tone reasonable. "It's functional. Without snow fences, properties on the edge are spending hours clearing drifts after every storm. It's a safety issue. If someone can't clear their driveway, emergency services can't reach them." Brenda cut in smoothly. "Mr. Anderson, you're welcome to submit a formal proposal to the Architectural Review Committee. They meet next week. But I can tell you that maintaining consistent standards across all properties is a core principle of this HOA. We can't have orange plastic fencing visible from the street. It's simply not acceptable." What if they weren't orange? What if they were brown or green, or the color isn't the only issue? The material is inappropriate for our community standards. I looked around the room, hoping to find at least one sympathetic face. Most people looked bored or annoyed that I was prolonging the meeting. A few nodded along with Brenda's comments. "So there's no circumstance under which the board would approve a temporary snow fence. Submit your proposal, and the committee will review it fairly." Her tone suggested the outcome was already decided. I sat down, knowing I had wasted my time. The meeting wrapped up 20 minutes later. As people filed out, a woman about my age approached me. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she understood exactly what I was dealing with. "You're on Pinecrest, right? The edge of the development?" "Yeah." "Jacob Anderson. Lisa Henderson. I'm 2 streets over, also backing up to the field. I heard you got hit with a violation for putting up a snow fence. Guilty as charged. You dealing with the drifts too? Every single storm, it's brutal. My husband and I spend half our weekend clearing snow." "Did you try putting up a fence?" She shook her head. "We're new too, moved in last spring. This is our first winter. After we saw what happened to you, we figured there was no point." Brenda would just fine us into submission. So what do? Shovel. A lot. We're actually thinking about selling once spring comes. This isn't what we signed up for. We exchanged phone numbers and commiserated for a few more minutes before heading to our cars. The temperature had dropped to below zero, and the wind cut through my jacket like a knife. Another storm was forecast for the weekend. A big one. I drove home thinking about Lisa's comment about selling. Was that my only option? Move again after less than a year? Take a loss on the house because the HOA wouldn't allow common sense modifications? The injustice of it burned in my chest. The weekend storm was everything the forecasters promised and more. 12 inches of snow fell Friday night into Saturday, with winds that sustained 35 miles per hour. By Saturday morning, the drift across my driveway was over 7 feet tall. It completely blocked my garage doors and buried my truck, which I had stupidly left parked in front of the house. I stared at it through my window, coffee mug in hand, and felt something inside me break. Not anger exactly, something colder and more calculating. I thought about Brenda in her protected little house on Aspen Court. I thought about the other board members who lived deep in the development, who had no concept of what edge properties dealt with. I thought about the dismissive way they had treated legitimate concerns at the meeting. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to put up the snow fence. I was going to follow their rules exactly, and I was going to document everything. I spent 6 hours that Saturday clearing my driveway. I took pictures every 30 minutes, showing the progress, the massive amount of snow, the physical toll it took. I filmed short videos explaining what I was doing and why. I documented the temperature, the wind chill, everything. By the time I finished, it was dark. I could barely move my arms, and I had a comprehensive record of what it took to clear a single drifting event. Sunday morning, I drove slowly through the development, taking pictures. The interior streets were clear. Driveways had light coverings easily removed. But Pinecrest Drive and the other edge streets looked like disaster zones. Every house backing up to the field was buried. I saw John Miller outside again, this time with his wife, both of them shoveling in grim silence. I saw Lisa's house with a drift that covered their entire front porch. I compiled everything into a detailed report. Pictures, videos, weather data, time estimates, physical toll. I calculated the cost in hours, in physical labor, in wear and tear on snow removal equipment. I compared it to the cost of a simple snow fence and the installation time. Then I submitted it to the Architectural Review Committee along with a formal application to install a temporary snow fence from November through April, made of brown plastic to better blend with the winter landscape. The rejection came 3 days later via email. Dear Mr. Anderson, the Architectural Review Committee has carefully considered your application. While we appreciate your thorough documentation, we must respectfully deny your request. The proposed snow fence, regardless of color, does not meet our community standards for approved materials and would negatively impact the visual aesthetics of the development. We suggest investing in professional snow removal services if the drifting is unmanageable. Sincerely, the Whispering Pines HOA Architectural Review Committee. I read the email 3 times. Then I opened a new browser window and started researching Minnesota weather patterns, historical storm data, and long-range forecasts. The meteorologists were predicting an unusually harsh late winter. Multiple storm systems were lining up in the jet stream, and the long-range models showed a pattern that could persist through March. I thought about what Brenda had said. Remove the fence or face the fines. Rules apply equally to everyone. We can't make exceptions. Fine. No exceptions. I spent that evening calling around until I found a small construction company willing to do a rush job. It cost me $1,500, but by the end of the week, I had a permanent cedar privacy fence installed at my property line. 6 feet tall, approved material, approved stain color, with proper posts set in concrete. It completely blocked the view of the field and, critically, created a massive wind barrier that would cause drifts to form differently. The fence didn't stop the snow from drifting. It redirected it. The wind patterns changed dramatically. Instead of building up gradually across the open space between the field and my house, the snow now hit the fence and formed enormous drifts along the property line. The wind then whipped around the ends of the fence, creating vortexes that pushed the drifting snow sideways and backward toward the field. More importantly, the fence changed how the wind moved across the entire edge of the development. The 5 acres behind my house acted like a funnel. Before, wind from the open field spread out naturally. Now, with my solid fence blocking the direct path, it channeled along the property lines, affecting my neighbors' properties more severely. I didn't realize how dramatic the effect would be until the next storm hit. Wednesday brought another 8 inches with high winds. I woke Thursday morning to find my driveway completely clear. The wind had simply blown over my property, the cedar fence creating an air current that swept the snow away from my house. The massive drift sat against the fence itself, exactly where I wanted it. I looked at John Miller's house and felt my stomach drop. His drifts were twice as bad as before. The snow had piled up against his garage, his front door, everywhere. I could see him outside with a shovel, moving like someone who had given up but kept going through sheer stubbornness. Lisa's house, 2 streets over, was similarly buried. The wind patterns had changed for all the edge properties, but mine was now protected while everyone else suffered worse conditions. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I had tried to do it the right way. I had proposed a solution that would have helped everyone. The HOA had rejected it. This was on them, but the guilt gnawed at me anyway. I was getting into my truck when John called out. "Hey, Anderson," I paused. He trudged over, looking exhausted. "How the hell is your place clear?" he asked. "We got slammed. The fence, it changed the wind patterns." He looked at my cedar privacy fence, then back at his buried property. "That's allowed. It's approved material, approved color, installed properly. I submitted the paperwork and everything. But you put up that snow fence earlier and got violations. Orange plastic isn't approved, cedar is." He stared at me and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "How much did that cost?" $1,500 installed. I had them do it rush. Jesus. He looked back at his house. "I can't afford that, not right now, I know." "Look, I tried to get the HOA to approve temporary snow fences. They shut me down hard, said it was an aesthetic issue." "That's insane." "That's Brenda Morrison," he snorted. "Yeah. She sent me a violation notice last month because I left my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 24 hours after pickup. I was out of town for work. We stood there in the cold, 2 guys dealing with the same insane system in different ways. "I'm sorry your drifts are worse," I said and meant it. "Not your fault. You're just trying to protect your place." But it felt like my fault as I drove away. The pattern continued through late February. Every storm buried the edge properties worse than before, while my house remained clear. I watched my neighbors struggle. I saw Lisa and her husband outside for hours after every snowfall. I saw John hire a guy with a plow truck, then saw the violation notice on his door 3 days later because the plow guy had left some snow on the street, and that violated the community guidelines. I kept documenting everything. Pictures, videos, weather data. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but some instinct told me I was going to need evidence. The first week of March brought the storm everyone had been dreading. The local news called it a bomb cyclone, a massive system that formed when a low-pressure area intensified rapidly. The forecasts were predicting upwards of 20 inches with sustained winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour. Blizzard warnings covered the entire region. Schools announced closures 2 days in advance. The governor held a press conference urging people to stay home and stock up on essentials. I went to the grocery store Wednesday evening and found chaos. Shelves were stripped bare of bread, milk, and eggs. People were loading carts like they were preparing for the apocalypse. I grabbed some basics and headed home, watching the sky turn gray and ominous. The storm hit Thursday morning with a vengeance. By noon, visibility was down to 50 feet. The wind howled with a sound like a living thing, rattling my windows and making the whole house groan. Snow fell so thick and fast that I couldn't see my fence from the windows. I spent the day inside, working remotely when the power stayed on and reading when it flickered. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero before wind chill. With wind chill, the Weather Service estimated 40 below. Genuinely dangerous conditions where exposed skin could get frostbite in 10 minutes. The storm raged through Thursday night and into Friday morning. I woke at dawn to an eerie silence. The wind had stopped. Everything outside was buried under snow that looked blue in the early light. My driveway was clear. Well, not clear, but manageable. Maybe 6 inches of snow, easily removed. The cedar fence had done its job. The massive drift sat against it like a frozen wave, 12 feet tall in places, but away from my house. I looked toward John's property and felt my heart sink. His house was completely buried. Drifts covered his front door, his windows, everything. Only the peak of his roof was visible. It looked like the house had been swallowed by a frozen tsunami. I grabbed my binoculars and checked the other edge properties. They were all the same, buried, impassable. Lisa's house had a drift that reached her second-story windows. Another neighbor I didn't know well had snow completely blocking their garage and front entrance. The houses in the interior of the development were fine. They had the normal 2 feet of accumulation, heavy but manageable. But the edge properties looked like something from an Arctic expedition gone wrong. I got dressed in layers, grabbed my snow blower and shovel, and went outside. The cold hit me like a physical force. 40 below with wind chill wasn't a joke. I cleared my driveway in about an hour, then stood there looking at John's place. I should help him. That was the right thing to do, but his drifts were so massive that it would take all day, maybe longer. And I wasn't sure I was physically capable of that much work. I was still debating when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Hello, is this Jacob Anderson?" A woman's voice, official sounding. "Yes. This is Deputy Sarah Mitchell with the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. We're conducting welfare checks on addresses along County Road 7 following the storm. Your address is flagged as potentially affected. Are you safe and able to access emergency services if needed?" "I'm fine. My driveway is clear." "That's good to hear. We have several addresses in your development that are reporting impassable conditions. Are you aware of any neighbors who might need assistance?" I thought about lying. Then I thought about what would happen if someone had a medical emergency and couldn't get out. "Yeah. The houses on my street backing up to the field are buried, major drifting. I don't think they can get out. Can you provide specific addresses?" I gave her John's address and Lisa's and 2 others I could see from my property. "Thank you. We'll get emergency services out there." "Are you able to shelter in place for the next 24 to 48 hours? The roads are still being cleared. I can. Good. Stay safe. She hung up. I went back inside and made coffee, watching through my window as the morning progressed. Around 10, I saw the first emergency vehicle, a county plow truck with amber lights flashing. It cleared the main roads through the development, pushing snow into mountains at the intersections. Behind it came a sheriff's SUV and a fire department truck. They stopped at John's house first. I watched as firefighters in full gear approached with shovels and started clearing a path to his front door. It took them over an hour just to reach it. When they finally got the door open, John came out looking dazed and frightened. They talked to him for a while, and I saw him gesture toward his buried driveway and garage. The same scene played out at each buried house. Emergency services cleared paths to doors, checked on residents, and documented the conditions. The fire department ended up bringing in a front-end loader to move the massive amounts of snow. By evening, all the edge properties had at least a walking path cleared by emergency services. The residents were safe but effectively trapped. Their driveways remained buried, their cars inaccessible. It would take days or professional equipment to fully clear them. My doorbell rang just after dark. I opened it to find Deputy Mitchell standing there with a clipboard and a grim expression. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Deputy Mitchell. We spoke on the phone." "Right. Come in out of the cold." She stepped into my entryway, stamping snow off her boots. "I have some questions about the conditions in this development. You reported the buried properties?" "Yeah, I could see them from my windows. But your property is clear." "Relatively, yeah." "Can you explain why there's such a dramatic difference?" I gestured toward my windows. "I installed a cedar fence last month. It changed the wind patterns. My place is protected now, but it affected where the drifts form." She made notes on her clipboard. "Were your neighbors aware you were installing this fence?" "It's my property. I don't need their permission." "I'm not suggesting you did anything wrong, sir. I'm just trying to understand the situation. We've had 4 families trapped in their homes requiring emergency assistance. The fire chief wants to know if this is likely to repeat with future storms." The implications of that question settled over me like a weight. The fence is permanent, so yeah, the wind patterns will be the same in future storms. "I see." More notes. "Have you had any communications with your homeowners association about this?" "I tried to get approval for a temporary snow fence earlier this winter. They rejected it, so I installed an approved permanent fence instead." The HOA rejected a snow fence, said it was an aesthetic issue. Orange plastic didn't meet their standards. Deputy Mitchell looked up from her clipboard, and I saw something like disbelief cross her face. "They rejected a functional snow fence for aesthetic reasons." "That's correct." "And then you installed a privacy fence that solved your problem but made the drifting worse for your neighbors." When she put it like that, it sounded bad. "I installed an approved fence on my property using approved materials. I followed all their rules. What happened to the wind patterns is a side effect, not intentional. But you were aware it would change how snow drifted." I hesitated. "I knew it would protect my property. I didn't calculate exactly how it would affect others." She studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Anderson, I'm going to be straight with you. 4 families needed emergency services today because they couldn't get out of their homes. That's a public safety issue. If this pattern continues, we're going to have to look at solutions." "What kind of solutions?" "I don't know yet. That's above my pay grade. But the county emergency management office is going to be very interested in this situation." After she left, I sat in my living room feeling sick. I had followed the rules exactly. I had done everything the HOA required. But 4 families had needed emergency rescue, because of my fence. Except it wasn't really because of my fence. It was because the HOA had rejected a simple, effective solution to a known problem. They had forced me to find an alternative that ended up making things worse for everyone else. That distinction felt important, but I wasn't sure it mattered. Saturday morning, I woke to someone pounding on my door. I opened it to find John standing there with his wife Emily, both of them looking furious. "You son of a bitch," John said, pushing past me into my house. "John, what, your fence? That's why our house was buried." The fire chief explained how the wind patterns work. "Your fence redirected everything onto the rest of us." "I didn't mean we were trapped. You understand that? Trapped in our house with no way to get out. If there had been a fire or a medical emergency, we could have died." His wife was crying. "Our daughter called yesterday because she couldn't reach us. She drove up from Minneapolis in that storm, terrified that something had happened to us. She got stuck on the highway and had to spend the night in her car. She could have died because of your fence." The guilt I had been trying to ignore crashed over me. "I'm sorry, I really am, but the HOA wouldn't approve snow fences. I tried. So you protected yourself and damned the rest of us." John's face was red. "What kind of person does that?" "The kind who tried to help everyone and got shut down. I went to the HOA meeting. I submitted a formal proposal. Brenda Morrison and her committee rejected it because orange plastic didn't meet their aesthetic standards. What was I supposed to do? Not build a fence that buried your neighbors. It's a cedar privacy fence. It's completely legal and approved by the HOA. I have every right. Legal and right aren't the same thing," Emily cut in. "You knew what would happen. You saw us struggling all winter and you made it worse." "I tried to help. You tried to help yourself," John said. "Now our driveway is still buried. We can't get our cars out. I missed 3 days of work, and we've got thousands of dollars in snow removal costs coming. I hope you're happy with your clear driveway." They left, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the frame. I spent the rest of the weekend hiding in my house, feeling like the worst person in the world. My phone rang repeatedly. The first few calls were from other neighbors, all saying variations of what John had said. I stopped answering. Monday morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA. "Dear Mr. Anderson, it has come to the board's attention that the cedar fence installed at your property has created adverse conditions affecting neighboring properties. While the fence itself is compliant with architectural standards, the board is concerned about the unintended consequences of its placement. We are scheduling an emergency board meeting for March 10th to discuss potential solutions. Your attendance is mandatory. Failure to attend may result in fines and further action. Sincerely, Brenda Morrison, HOA President." I read it twice, then laughed. It was a bitter, angry sound. Now they were concerned. After rejecting my reasonable solution and forcing me to find an alternative, now they wanted to discuss it. The emergency meeting was held on Wednesday evening. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled, and people lined the walls. I recognized most of my neighbors, but there were also people I had never seen before. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Brenda called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency, but I could see cracks in her composure. Her smile was strained, and she kept glancing at the crowd nervously. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is an unusual meeting, but we have an urgent situation to address. As many of you know, the recent storm created severe drifting conditions for several properties on the edge of our development. Emergency services were required to rescue trapped residents. After investigation, it appears that a recently installed fence on the Anderson property significantly altered wind patterns, exacerbating the drifting problem. She displayed pictures on the projector. My house with its clear driveway. John's house buried in snow. Lisa's house. Others. The contrast was dramatic and damning. The board takes resident safety very seriously. While Mr. Anderson's fence meets our architectural standards, its impact on neighboring properties creates an unacceptable situation. We need to discuss solutions. I raised my hand. Brenda's eyes fixed on me with something like dread. Yes, Mr. Anderson, I stood. Before we discuss solutions, I think everyone should know the full context. Last January, I installed a temporary snow fence to prevent drifting on my property. It was effective and inexpensive. The HOA issued violations and threatened daily fines until I removed it. I attended an HOA meeting and formally proposed allowing temporary snow fences for edge properties. The board rejected that proposal, stating that orange plastic didn't meet aesthetic standards. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brenda's face flushed. When the board rejected a reasonable solution, I was forced to find an alternative. I installed a permanent cedar fence using approved materials in approved colors. It meets every single architectural guideline. The fact that it changed wind patterns is an unintended consequence of following the HOA's rules. That's not entirely accurate, Brenda said. You were told that you could submit a formal proposal, which I did, and which you rejected. I have the email. Would you like me to read it to everyone? Her mouth tightened. The committee reviewed your proposal and determined that aesthetics were more important than function. Yes, I remember. A man I didn't know stood up. So let me get this straight. Anderson tried to put up a cheap temporary fence that would have solved the problem. You told him no. So he built an expensive permanent fence that made everything worse. And now you want to blame him. That's not what I'm saying, Brenda protested. The board has to balance many concerns. My daughter almost died on the highway because we were trapped in our house. Emily shouted from across the room. Balance that. The meeting devolved into chaos. People shouted over each other. John accused me of being selfish. Lisa's husband demanded to know why the HOA hadn't approved functional solutions in the first place. Someone else suggested suing me for damages. Another person suggested suing the HOA. Brenda tried repeatedly to restore order, finally pounding a gavel that I didn't even know the HOA owned. Everyone quiet down. We need constructive solutions, not accusations. Fine, I said, loud enough to cut through the noise. Here's a solution. Approve temporary snow fences for any property that wants them. Cheap, effective, removable each spring. Problem solved. Those fences are unsightly, Brenda said automatically. Our houses being buried is unsightly, John shot back. I'll take orange plastic over 12-foot drifts any day. A vote was called. Of the 27 residents present, 23 voted to amend the architectural guidelines to allow temporary snow fences from November through April. Only 4 voted against, all board members who lived in the protected interior of the development. The amendment passed. Brenda looked like she had swallowed something sour. Fine, the guidelines will be amended, but Mr. Anderson's fence still poses a problem. We need to discuss requiring its removal or modification. No, I said flatly. Excuse me. My fence is compliant. It's my property. You're not touching it. It's creating hazardous conditions, so approve the snow fences. If everyone on the edge has proper wind breaks, my fence won't matter. A lawyer in the back, someone I vaguely recognized from around the development, spoke up. He's right. You can't compel him to remove a compliant structure from his property, but you can allow other residents to install protective measures. That's the legally defensible solution. Brenda looked around the room, clearly searching for support and finding none. Fine. The amendment will be formalized and distributed. Meeting adjourned. People filed out, still muttering and arguing. John approached me as I was leaving. "I still think what you did was selfish," he said. "But you were right about the HOA being unreasonable. I really didn't mean for your house to get buried like that. But you knew it would change the wind patterns." I met his eyes. "Honestly, I knew it would protect my place. I didn't calculate exactly how it would affect everyone else if I had it to do over." I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Would you do it differently? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. I should have thought about the bigger picture. He nodded slowly. "We're getting snow fences installed next weekend. Most of the edge properties are going in together to get a bulk rate. You interested?" "I have the cedar fence. For the wind coming from the field, yeah. But there's crosswind too. An additional snow fence along the side property lines might help everyone." It felt like an olive branch. "Yeah. Count me in." Over the next 2 weeks, orange snow fences went up along every edge property in Whispering Pines. The HOA had approved them, documenting the change as a safety-based exception to architectural standards. They looked exactly as ugly as Brenda had feared, bright orange plastic staring at everyone who drove past. But they worked. When the next storm hit in mid-March, the drifting was manageable across all properties. Everyone spent an hour or two clearing snow instead of entire days. No one needed emergency services. No one got trapped. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In late March, I received a notice that the St. Louis County Attorney's Office wanted to speak with me regarding the February storm incident. I called the number and was connected to an assistant county attorney named David Walsh. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for returning my call. I'm investigating potential liability issues related to the February storm and the conditions in Whispering Pines. I understand you installed a fence that altered wind patterns." "Yes, but it was compliant with all HOA regulations." "I'm not suggesting you did anything illegal. I'm trying to determine if the HOA's actions created a hazardous situation that required emergency services response." "What do you mean?" "You initially attempted to install temporary snow fences that would have prevented the drifting, correct?" "Yes. And the HOA prohibited this using aesthetic-based regulations." "That's correct." "Which forced you to find an alternative solution that ultimately made conditions worse for other residents." "I guess so." "Mr. Anderson, emergency services spent 14 hours and significant county resources rescuing residents who were trapped because of snow drifts. The county is exploring whether the HOA's unreasonable regulations contributed to creating that hazardous situation." I sat down, processing this. "Are you saying the county might take action against the HOA?" "Possibly. We're still investigating." "But HOAs have broad authority except when their regulations create public safety hazards. This situation might qualify. I'll need copies of all your communications with the HOA, including violation notices, emails, meeting minutes, everything." I spent the next week compiling documents. Every violation notice, every email, every piece of correspondence. My detailed report with pictures and videos. The HOA meeting minutes where they rejected my proposal. The Architectural Review Committee's denial letter. All of it. Walsh called me after reviewing everything. "This is worse than I thought. The HOA had multiple opportunities to address a known safety issue and chose aesthetics over function every time. We're moving forward with an investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means the county is going to examine whether the HOA violated Minnesota statutes regarding negligent maintenance of property and creation of hazardous conditions. If we determine they did, we'll refer it for enforcement." 2 weeks later, Brenda Morrison received a formal notice from the county attorney's office informing her that Whispering Pines HOA was under investigation for potential violations of Minnesota public safety statutes. The notice required the HOA to produce all relevant documents and appear for questioning. Brenda called an emergency board meeting and hired a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the situation and reportedly told them they were in serious legal trouble. The HOA's insistence on aesthetic standards, while ignoring known safety issues, combined with the documented emergency services response, created significant liability. In May, the county attorney's office concluded their investigation and filed civil charges against the Whispering Pines HOA for negligent enforcement of regulations creating hazardous conditions. The charges didn't carry criminal penalties, but included substantial fines and required remediation. The HOA lawyer negotiated a settlement. The HOA paid $40,000 in fines to cover emergency services costs. They were required to amend their architectural guidelines to include safety-based exceptions for any functional modifications designed to prevent hazardous conditions. They had to create a formal process for residents to petition for safety exemptions. And critically, they had to refund all violation fines they had collected from me for the original snow fence, plus legal costs. Brenda Morrison resigned as HOA president in June. She moved out of Whispering Pines entirely by August, selling her house and leaving Minnesota. The new HOA president was a retired engineer who actually understood concepts like wind patterns and functional design. John and I ended up becoming friends. We did a property line fence project together the following summer, splitting costs and labor. Lisa and her husband decided to stay after all, now that the snow management was reasonable. The next winter, every edge property had proper snow fences installed. The drifts still formed, but they formed where we wanted them, catching snow before it reached houses and driveways. The orange plastic was visible from half a mile away, and it was the most beautiful ugly thing I had ever seen. I kept my cedar privacy fence. It served as a reminder that following the rules without questioning their purpose could lead to disaster. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same. Sometimes you had to stand up and fight for common sense, even when it meant going against authority. But I also learned that my actions had consequences beyond my property line. I should have fought harder in the beginning, should have rallied neighbors and made more noise before resorting to a solution that made their situations worse. Good intentions without consideration of broader impacts could be as harmful as malicious ones. The settlement money from the HOA covered my legal costs, and then some. I used part of it to buy a commercial-grade snow blower and made it known that any neighbor who needed help could call me. John and I cleared driveways together after storms, creating an informal neighborhood snow team. It became a winter tradition, turning something that had divided us into something that brought us together. 3 years later, Whispering Pines is a different place. The architectural guidelines still exist, but they've been revised to include common sense exemptions. The new board actually listens to residents. Property values stayed stable, proving that orange snow fences in winter don't destroy home prices like Brenda had insisted. I still live in the same house. My driveway is still clear after storms, but now so are all my neighbors. The fields behind us still create drifting conditions, but we manage them together with practical solutions instead of fighting over arbitrary aesthetic rules. Sometimes I drive past the spot where my original orange snow fence stood for those few brief weeks. I remember pulling it down, defeated by violation notices and daily fine threats. I remember thinking the HOA had won, that their rules were absolute. They weren't. Rules are made by people, and people can change them. Sometimes it takes a disaster to make change happen. Sometimes it takes standing up and fighting even when everyone says you're wrong. Sometimes it takes being willing to admit when your solution, while legal and justified, caused harm you didn't intend. The snow still falls every winter. The wind still howls across those open fields. But now we're ready for it, protected by ugly orange plastic and the knowledge that safety matters more than aesthetics. The drifts still form, massive frozen waves of white, but they form where we want them now, caught by barriers that work instead of blocked by rules that don't. Brenda Morrison's replacement rules are different. When someone proposes a modification for functional reasons, the board actually considers whether it makes sense, instead of just checking whether it meets arbitrary aesthetic standards. When there's a conflict between form and function, function wins. It's a novel concept for an HOA, but it works. Last winter, a new family moved into the development, buying the house Brenda had abandoned. They were from Florida, completely unprepared for Minnesota winters. They watched the first storm with wide-eyed terror as snow piled up outside their windows. John and I showed up with our snow blowers and cleared their driveway. We explained about the snow fences, the wind patterns, the history of the neighborhood's battle with the HOA over practical solutions. We told them the whole story about orange plastic and cedar fences and buried houses. So the HOA actually got in trouble with the county? The husband asked, incredulous. 40,000 in fines, I confirmed. Turns out you can't prioritize aesthetics over safety when people's lives are at risk. In Florida, our HOA fined people for having the wrong shade of mailbox, his wife said. We had that too. Then they learned what happens when unreasonable rules create actual hazards. They still care about mailbox colors, but they care more about keeping people safe. The new neighbors installed their own snow fence that weekend. Bright orange plastic, properly staked, positioned to catch drifts before they reached their house. It was ugly and functional and absolutely perfect. I drive past it every day on my way to work, and every time I see it, I remember what it took to get here. The violation notices, the fines, the emergency rescues, the investigation, the settlement. The price of teaching an HOA that rules without reason are worse than no rules at all. My cedar fence still stands, weathered now from 3 winters of wind and snow. It serves its purpose, protecting my property and reminding me of the consequences of fighting the wrong battle. I could have done more in the beginning to help everyone instead of just protecting myself. I could have been louder, more persistent, more willing to rally neighbors before taking individual action. But I also learned that sometimes you have to demonstrate the consequences of bad rules before people will change them. Sometimes the only way to make authority listen is to follow their rules exactly and let them see the results of their own short-sightedness. The fields behind whispering pines still stretch out for half a mile of open space. The wind still picks up snow and carries it in sheets of white. The drifts still form, natural and inevitable. But now we work with nature instead of against it, using simple practical tools that our HOA once banned as unsightly. Every winter storm is a test, and every cleared driveway is a reminder that we passed it. Not through expensive professional services or hours of backbreaking labor, but through common-sense solutions that should have been allowed from the beginning. Orange plastic snow fences line the edge of our development like flags of victory. They're visible from the main road, bright against the winter landscape. Visitors probably think they're ugly. I think they're beautiful, Every single foot of orange plastic a testament to what happens when residents stand up to unreasonable authority. Brenda Morrison is somewhere in Arizona now, according to Lisa, who keeps track of these things. Somewhere warm where HOA rules probably focus on desert landscaping and water conservation instead of snow management. I wonder if she ever thinks about Whispering Pines, about the disaster her aesthetic standards created. I wonder if she learned anything from it. I learned that following the rules isn't always enough. I learned that sometimes you have to fight, and sometimes you have to admit when your fight caused collateral damage. I learned that neighbors can forgive when you acknowledge mistakes and work to fix them. I learned that HOAs can change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Most importantly, I learned that ugly orange plastic catching snowdrifts is more valuable than any aesthetic standard. Function over form, safety over appearance, common sense over arbitrary rules. The snow will fall again this winter. The wind will howl. The drifts will form. But this time, all of us on the edge of Whispering Pines will be ready, protected by lessons learned through hardship and conflict and eventual understanding. My driveway will be clear. So will John's. So will Lisa's. So will everyone's who was once buried, because an HOA valued aesthetics over safety. The orange fences will do their job, catching snow where it belongs instead of letting it bury homes and trap families. And if anyone from the HOA complains about how those fences look, I've got 40,000 reasons why their opinion doesn't matter anymore. Safety won. Common sense won. The residents won. The snow fences stay.